So how do you know when it's time to quit alcohol for good? Well, I can tell you when I knew it was time to quit, and I should have known long before I did. But stay tuned and we'll give you some signs, and if you have a problem with alcohol, hopefully you'll leave it long before I did. I will never forget the day I quit drinking. It was a night of January 22nd, 2009. It wasn't a birthday or anything else significant that night. I simply looked in the mirror and saw a flushed and haggard face of a 40-year-old staring back at me. I had 6 or 7 beers already in me and 3 or 4 left in the fridge. If I had finished them, that would have only been a moderate night of consumption, as by then my normal was now 12 to 15 on the weeknights and more on the weekends. I didn't finish them. I pulled the remaining out and put them in the trash. I was done. I never drank again. I didn't check myself into rehab, didn't go to Alcoholics Anonymous. I made a contract with myself never to touch the substance again. I pulled out my revolver, put a round in the chamber, and put the gun on the table. Quit it or end it. That gun stayed on the table for the first 45 days of sobriety. It had finally gotten to that point. I figured if I was going to kill myself, then just do it. Not spend years in and out of a hospital letting John Barleycorn slowly take me. How did I know this was the time to quit? I had vertigo every morning accompanied with light nausea. There were little knives now periodically digging into my kidneys and liver. My blood pressure was well above normal. I existed in a black depression most of the time. And that night on January 22nd, 2009, as I was drinking and thinking, I remembered the time in my life when I wasn't an alcoholic. I had never denied that I was addicted to alcohol for about the last decade. I wasn't swimming in any river in Egypt. But that night, the addiction smacked me right across the forehead. I looked in the mirror and saw what I had done to myself. I had no idea how I was going to recover. I couldn't even picture a week without alcohol, let alone the rest of my life. But then I thought of that time before I was addicted. And I realized there was no law etched in stone that stated I couldn't live alcohol-free. After all, I existed in earlier days without touching it. I had had 4 beers in my entire high school. I passed through every single day without the substance back then, so why couldn't I return to that? Just because I was long legal to consume didn't mean I was obligated to do so. So I threw those remaining beers away, went through detox alone, and walked through the phases of recovery solo as well. When I quit it, I could not visualize never taking a drink again. Today I can't picture ever shaking hands with Johnny again. I'm almost 2 decades clean and I buried that former version of myself. I recreated my physical plane and returned to a life of high fitness. I engage in yoga and meditation daily for the emotional sphere. I advanced my career and have written 6 books now, fiction and nonfiction. I learned how to invest in stocks, short-term and long-term, which only continues to give me financial freedom. I truly cannot imagine being that guy that I was with his 12 and 15 beers a night and more on the weekends. That night, I drove a sword through his heart. I don't even visit his gravestone today. The question many will ask is, why did it take so long to have this insight? I was an alcoholic for 13 years. Surely, being the somewhat smart guy I am, I should have come to this conclusion earlier. What took so long to know this was the time to leave it for good? And how will the rest of you know as well? The thing with alcoholism is it is a slow, insidious addiction. It disguises itself with normality. Everyone drinks when they're young and usually heavily. At 18 through 26, I wasn't doing anything different than everyone else. All my late teenage and early 20s friends consumed heavily on the weekends. We all drank in the military as well. How come everyone else eventually drifted into the land of moderation and I fell off the landscape into the abyss? The reason for that leap into oblivion for alcoholics can be traced back to those initial drinking days. As I stated in another article, most of the young will consume alcohol and many times in great quantities, but the vast majority are consuming for recreation. The future alcoholic is using it to alleviate pain, usually from past trauma. Sure, he engages in it with his friends as well, but then he begins to indulge in it without the recreational component. He starts drinking alone. Then with enough years of that, he becomes physically addicted as well. The physical addiction part also is in disguise because it progresses in stages. In my very early days, in the years 18 to 22, I drank on the weekends. We all had 2-day binges starting Friday when the whistle blew. But I never thought about alcohol during the week. I wasn't an alcoholic yet, but I was planting the early seeds for it. I wouldn't have thought about quitting it though, because I wasn't drinking most nights. Then binge drinking starts. Binge drinking is the next stage in the progression of alcoholism. I had about 9 months straight at 23 when I was consuming 6 to 8 beers a night and maybe a little more on the weekends. I was in the first year of the military and things were at rock bottom in my life as an enlisted soldier who was still greatly affected by his past childhood and just didn't know it yet. My social dating life was none at all and I didn't know why. So I used the painkiller that John Barleycorn offered, but I came out of it when I transferred from my first location to an Army course located at Goodfellow Air Force Base. I went back to working out all the time and only drank on the weekends once again. But the first long binge is the warning sign that possibly one should consider giving it up. Having a binge for a long weekend is common, 9 months is not. But the future alcoholic isn't aware of that yet. He likes the escape of alcohol, but isn't in the state of total physical addiction. John Barleycorn is playing a game with him. He advances 2 feet of the train, then retreats 1. When the former alcoholic looks back, he will note that as he waxed and waned in his growing addiction, the waxing always added another layer. It is something that is only noted in retrospect. Sure, at the Air Force Base I was only drinking a lot on the weekends, but it was still every week. This would be the time to stop the progression. Either the person fades back to become a permanent light drinker socially, or now is when the person should cease from alcohol altogether, because he is beginning to get physically addicted to it. The addiction just hasn't grown to needing the substance every day. I've written before how I went from having alcohol under control to the day when Johnny finally stormed the breach and took the terrain. I was 27 and on a spring break during my freshman year of college. I drank large amounts every night during that interval. I figured I'd go back to my version of normalcy when I returned, but this time I didn't. That's when I transformed into a nightly drinker, and from that point on, the amounts just slowly increased. This is when I knew I had a problem. When you definitely know you have a problem with alcohol, this is also when you should be ready to leave it. One will try to negotiate with himself to go back to moderation. It'll last for a bit. I tried to revert back to what I was doing prior to that spring break plunge. When I left the military at 26, I was having maybe 2 or 3 beers if I didn't have a workout plan the next day, and then 6 to 8 on one weekend night. I wasn't aware that my pal Johnny was slowly driving in the stakes. Every time I tried to revert back to that, it never lasted more than a week. There's an easy self-test that you can do if you're trying to determine if you're ready to quit alcohol. When you are engaged in this negotiation with John Barleycorn of just going back to moderate drinking, ask yourself, can I just give it up? It's very simple. It's not normal to believe that you couldn't live without alcohol. Most people will enjoy social drinking. Some people may even relish getting drunk on an occasional Saturday night. But those people could leave it without too much worry. If you cannot picture yourself without alcohol, then you are now addicted to it. I shouldn't have waited until I was drinking 4 cases a week. By early 30s, I was doing this negotiation with Johnny, and John Barleycorn is known to renege on every deal. I knew I was an alcoholic and should have been ready to quit, because at that point, you're going to go through withdrawal no matter when you decide to give it up. Or, you won't ever go through withdrawal, you'll just die young from alcoholism. I don't know why I picked the day January 22nd, 2009. I was 40 years old, the traditional halfway mark to the celestial transfer. I had known for the last few years if I kept going the way I was, I would be gone by 50-some years old and would be in constant misery until then. I counted myself lucky that I had never gotten a DUI or anything else that would follow me the rest of my days. I also knew the body was very forgiving at 40 with excess substance abuse of any type. So I simply decided that night to change my life. The decision is just like the 400-pound person who looks in the mirror one day and decides he's had enough. I knew I was headed for the storm of initial detox, and I knew it was going to be awful. But I also knew when I got through it, and the first 30 days or so passed, I would now reinvent everything in my being. When I tossed the last few cans into the trash, I wasn't testing the waters to see if I could quit drinking. I made an irrevocable contract that night that me and Johnny B were finished. I was going to figure out why I wanted him as a friend to begin with. I was going to sort out that abused past and come out far better than before I began drinking. And that was when I took my first step on the path to reinvention of self. Now, if you found this helpful, go ahead and follow along and subscribe. And for my condensed work on how to handle the phases of recovery to cure, check out the small book, How I Beat Alcoholism and Why Alcoholics Anonymous Doesn't Work. Link is in the description, usually free on KDP. And remember, keep your contract. Be sober at sundown, and I will see you at the next sunrise.